Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the latest Speak seminar in our TAPAS seminar series. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Paul Linden. I'm the principal investigator of TAPAS, and I'm based in Cambridge. And as I think most of you know, looking at the names here, TAPAS is a network funded by NERC, looking at air pollution in schools, and in particular the interaction between indoor air pollution and outdoor air pollution, and that interface. And we are a network which are trying to investigate the kind of issues that are involved around air pollution in schools and look at possible solutions to them. And to disseminate this information across a whole range of stakeholders, from academics through to policymakers, industry who are involved with the design of schools, and of course people who work and study in schools and are involved with their management. So as part of our activities, we run these seminar series, and the current one in this spring, summer of this year is on Thursdays. And today we're very fortunate to have Kate Langham here to talk to us. Kate is the senior co-design lead at Policy Lab, which is the design team set up within the UK government to give assistance with design and policy making across various government departments. She did a PhD on community-led design processes for the built environment, in particular looking at urban spaces and focusing to some extent on younger people. She's the co-director and co-founder of the Association of Collaborative Design, a UN Habitat World Campaign partner, mainstreaming collaborative design processes across the built environment sector. And we're very interested in co-design. We're pleased to see Sarah West here, who's doing a lot of co-design work in her activities at York. So we look forward to hearing what you have to say, Kate. I'll let you share your screen, and just to remind everyone that please turn off your microphones and cameras while Kate is speaking. This is going to be recorded, so if you don't want to appear, don't turn them back on again. And please put your questions for Kate in the chat, and we'll deal with them at the end of her presentation. Okay, so thank you very much. So over to you, Kate, if you'd like to share your screen.
Thank you, Paul. Okay. Can you see that okay? I'm assuming so. Thank you for inviting me today. As Paul said, I'm Kate Langham. I'm senior co-design lead at Policy Lab. We are, for want of a better description, a design agency based within UK government, working across government, and we do people-led policy. So it's about starting with the people that are affected by a policy and working up. So I lead the co-design side on that. So working with people that we're directly a sort of going to affect with the policy that's being created, and then finding suitable methodologies for engaging them in a collaborative process that gives them a voice and a say in something that ultimately is going to sort of have an impact on their lives. As Paul said, I did my PhD as it was called Play as a Design Tool, and it was co-designing shared community space. So what I thought I'd do today is just give a little slide on co-design, a little slide on serious play, and then go into 3 case studies. So I will look at my PhD research and give you an overview on that side, which was very much working with schools, and then 2 case studies that of projects I've worked on since joining Policy Lab last September. One was sensitive, so unfortunately I can't give you the official name, but I have been given a permission to talk about the methodology we use. And the second project, I am allowed to sort of talk as it is. So as Paul said, please do put questions in the chat, and I'd be very happy to answer them afterwards. So in terms of co-design, it's a phrase that we hear more and more. I think that's something that I definitely have become very aware of since joining government, that it's really a word that's out there at the moment, and people are realizing that actually people and getting people involved in something, whether it's a space they're going to be using, whether it's a policy they're going to be affected by, getting those people involved at the start of a project is absolutely vital in terms of creating something that's appropriate for the users. So when I think about co-design, it's all about the whole process. So often designers create end products or services. In co-design, it's about the overall process that becomes the output. And there isn't one size fits all to co-design. It is about understanding your audience and tailoring those tools specifically to fit that group that you're working with, empowering them to become the expert so that you can sort of take a step back and let them lead. It's not a linear process. And I don't think I've ever worked on a project where we've known exactly what we were doing at the beginning and then it's just carried on as it is. It's very much something that shifts and changes throughout the course of the project as your research continues and you find out new ideas that will lead your methodology. And serious play, I think this is quite an interesting area. It's something that people are quite nervous about. I certainly experienced that in government, especially with a project I'll talk to you about later, where we're actually being asked not to call it a game and to call it a simulation, because they're a bit nervous by the concept of play. And I think this is something I really found out in my PhD research, actually, that play is something that we still associate with children on the whole, but actually play is something that is inherent to everybody, and it's interpreted in different ways. What play means for one person is different for what play means for another person. But I think what my research has certainly showed, and that I continue to be interested in, is that play creates an openness to participate. It allows people to explore and experiment using a shared language. It just is a case of making something that could be quite complicated, understandable, and breaking it down into forms that can be communicated easily and concurrently. And as a designer myself, that's my training. I've been a designer for 25 years through all my different disciplines that I've gone through. And I think I've always had play at the center of my work. It's inherently connected to creativity. It's the way naturally a designer finds new ways of thinking and new ways of working through problems to find some possible solutions. But it also provides a level playing field for people who aren't designers and who aren't naturally considering themselves to be creative. The other thing I noticed as well is that usually, not always, because not all play is positive, provides a continuation desire. So it's usually seen as quite fun and that people want to carry on play. So I'm going to just show you, first of all, my PhD research, which was about developing shared community space. The initial challenge came from Corsham Town Council. I'm based in Bath, and my PhD was looking at play space in city centres initially. And I was interested in the idea of what was happening to our town centres, as we've probably all noticed, shops are closing down, especially at that point when I was doing my PhD. And I was really interested in how you can connect people and how play space can be intersected into city centres to actually get people to engage through play. So I was really interested in this idea. And at that point, Corsham Town Council came to the university and they had a challenge where they wanted to create a methodology that would lead to a well cared for and popular destination park that would incorporate a play area that met the needs and aspirations of the local residents and visitors. And I just started my PhD. So as my supervisors always said, I slightly did the cart before the horse, in that I was straight into practice, but I did a design PhD. I was all about practice. So for me, that was a very natural way of working. My practice led my research, and I started with the Corsham project and then went on to do a project in Portsmouth as well, with looking at a park, and also in Somerset for a local school that was related to a sort of community shared area alongside the school. So just to talk to you about the process that I went through, thinking about the audience that I was going to be working with, this was the area, the recreational area that I was asked to look at, Springfield Recreation Ground in Corsham at the beginning. This is some photographs of what the space used to look like when I first started the project. I wasn't an urban designer. It was a fairly new area to me. My background is creative direction and branding and graphics and textiles, but I certainly hadn't done urban design or landscape design. So this was really something that I was, I mean, obviously it was going to be handed over to architects, but it was a new area for me. And it was a little bit overwhelming at first, if I'm totally honest, but it was an amazing opportunity and certainly led to my PhD. What I learned very early on from doing sort of standard survey research was that people were very passionate about this space. I had 656 people responding to me to take part in a survey. I very quickly clocked that 70% of those users that were using the recreational ground currently were under 17 years of age. And I also found out that the reason I had been asked to help was that a previous design for the recreational area that had been put forward by some landscape architects had no community engagement. It hadn't asked the local people what they wanted, and a plan had been put forward to the council, which was rejected because the community pushed back and they weren't happy. So at that point, I was thinking, well, I've got this project where people are really passionate about the space. I didn't live in the town itself. I lived nearby, but I certainly didn't live there. I didn't use it. I certainly didn't feel I was the right person to say what it should look like, and especially when the local people hadn't been engaged the first time. So I started thinking about how you could engage a local community and a predominantly younger audience, because in planning processes, often our younger audiences aren't given a voice. And I really wanted the younger audience, the schools and the primary schools, secondary schools and primary schools, to have a voice in the space that they were predominantly using. So I started thinking about symbolic object play, which was a big part of my research, and how as designers we tend to, you know, model and create to come up with ideas. So I tested lots of different materials, and it was quite interesting actually when I did some testing scenarios. Lego, people are quite precious about their Lego bricks, where they put them, and a little bit possessive. So plus you need a lot of Lego if you're running a community workshop, and it's quite expensive. So that wasn't going to work. Things like plasticine, you got one go at it. It takes a long time. And actually what I also noticed that you had to be quite quick with people, their attention span, especially with younger audiences. They got bored very quickly, and it had to be something that was quick, engaging, fun, collaborative, and also invited people who didn't consider themselves to be designers to join in. When I gave people pencils and pens, and there was this natural reaction to say, oh no, I'm not drawing, I'm not a designer. So how could I find a material that actually resonates and would automatically allow people to share and collaborate? And that's when I started thinking about cake. And cake isn't a new idea with architects and designers. The gingerbread, I can't remember the exact name of the exhibition, but there's a very famous exhibition held at the V&A, which is all about architects modeling out of cake, and people can come and see these incredible exhibitions of architects' ideas building with cakes and biscuits and sweets. So I thought, well, maybe I could try this as a material, thinking of the audience I was working with. There was a lot of people I needed to engage at various levels. So I did a test run buying cakes, biscuits and sweets, and just seeing if I could recreate Springfield Recreation Ground out of this material. And it worked. It was fun, it was engaging, it was accessible. So then I went back to the communities and I asked them if they would come to co-design workshops. I did a design brief, using the information I'd gathered from the survey. So they had a guideline. I gave them instructions on what they were going to be doing. They had certain cakes that they could use for the foundation. So sort of flatter angel cakes were really quick, and Battenberg cakes and Madeira cakes that they would usually use for the foundation. There were rules, but as with any game, we tend to sometimes break the rules a little bit. So it was all based on a game, and from my PhD, I actually created a user guide which takes this whole process into a game format, almost like a board game, with the different players and the different materials and how to use them, so that other people can take this methodology on if they wanted to. So I worked with schools, and not only primary and secondary schools, but also teenager or sort of younger adolescents, if you like, groups at workshops, and also older members of the community as well were engaging in this process too. So it was very much something that everybody could get involved with. I did this over the 3 projects I worked with. So some of the images you're looking at here are from Springfield Recreation Ground, some are from the Somerset project, and some are looking at Portsmouth, which was the play with the park in the centre of the town that the university students very much used and weren't being given an opportunity to say on how that was going to be developed. So I worked with Portsmouth University, and we put in the ideas from the students. So I worked with groups to design and get them to co-design in groups of 6 to 8 their ideal recreational space, and then from that was asking them to present back their ideas. So this is an example of a final model from the Portsmouth project, actually, where I asked then the students to present the model back to me. I would photograph this model and then, oh, wrong way, sorry, then start the translation. So using design packages, I would then just take it simply into a black and white drawing and start mapping out pathways and key aspects within the design that were important and to pick out. And then from that, taking it into bubble zones, so working out what they've been asking for in the different areas and then identifying those accordingly. Then it was a case of removing the cake and actually then coming back to a mapped plan, still on the cake scale at this point, but at least showing what they were saying and where it was placed. And then from that, taking the design into a scaled mapped plan, usually working alongside OS maps to make sure that it was all to scale and that this could then be represented back to the group. So a key part of my work has always been about co-refine after co-design. So having done co-design workshops with all of my projects, I would then come back to the groups and show them their translations as in a co-refine workshop. So this is an example from the Somerset project, where out of 16 final designs with various community groups, I would take it down to 3 design proposals, trying to see where the similarities were, and then go back to the groups and ask them to review their translated designs. So, you know, they loved seeing their cake models translated into plans. There was great excitement, there was great engagement. It was really lovely to, especially with the children, they were so enthusiastic. And the teenagers as well, they absolutely loved getting involved. I had so much feedback from Portsmouth University about students who had never engaged in a lecture before or a process before and maybe never even spoken. And in one situation particularly, the student came forward and actually led their presentation and was, you know, really so enthusiastic. So I think it was really lovely to sometimes see that in this process, it would give others who maybe hadn't had a voice before an opportunity to speak and to feel that they could participate. So I would ask people to select their favorite designs and also a link to those bubble zones. I would put mood boards together and they could choose the sort of look and feel that they would like for equipment, play equipment or skateboard equipment or cafes, community gardens, etc. And everyone would vote on them. And then it would come through to the final design. And this is actually Springfield Recreation Ground, which has gone through to implementation now. And this is the ground, thinking of those photographs I showed at the beginning of what it was before. This is it now. And it really was an amazing project to work with because it wasn't designed by me. It was designed by the community. It was co-designed and then co-refined, working with the local community and working with those key user groups who had a chance to say what they wanted. And I had a lovely endorsement from the town council saying that there had been extremely positive feedback. It was certainly something that the community were embracing and very pleased to see that they had been listened to. So with that in mind, I think when I think back to this process, what I found in my PhD research was that this playful engagement gave a much more in-depth level of understanding as to what the users were wanting at the consultation process, meaning that the community was given the necessary attention throughout the project. It wasn't a case of going in with just design boards and me telling them what I thought. It was about starting almost with a blank sheet of paper and letting them lead the design by giving them tools that enabled them to be designers and that they could play out their own ideas. It didn't matter what the age was, what the ability was of the player. They could all join in. It was creative, it was fun. I had some situations where, you know, there was a lot of rivalry, especially between, in one project, some teenage groups and some older members of the community. They felt that either group didn't understand one another, and then there was a lot of conflict. And actually, when I put them into a room and they were working together, what we ended up doing and what went forward in the caution project was that they actually put the skate park next to the gym, and the adults had been asking, or the older members of the community had been asking predominantly for a gym, and the younger members, the teenagers predominantly, had been asking for a skate park. And actually, rather than it being at opposite ends of the park, they actually put it next to one another because they wanted to integrate and they wanted to understand each other better. So I think that was really interesting aspects of my project, that it did bring different groups together. It was quite hard work and it wasn't certainly perfect all the time. There was a lot of conflict at points, but if you could just gently let people own the process themselves, it certainly gave some visuals that and visual input from people that otherwise maybe wouldn't have had that opportunity. A second project I want to talk about is linked to my first project when I joined Policy Lab. I'm going to talk about it from a built environment spaces perspective, as I haven't got permission to name the project. It's literally just finished. It's not yet published. It will be published, but I think I can get away with telling you about the methodology, and they've certainly given me approval for that. And I will just talk about it from a point of view of how can we improve built environment spaces for people living with health conditions and disabilities. So that was our challenge, is working with people with health conditions and disabilities, and understanding how we can improve the built environment for them. We did a 3-stage process to this project. So first phase 1 was understanding the challenges, and we worked with experts in inclusive design and also those people who work with people with disabilities and health conditions. So we interviewed a number of experts, 10 experts in total, that really gave us an understanding of best practice and what was really important from a neurodiversity perspective, from a disability, physical disability perspective, and then also from best practice inclusive design within a built environment. Phase 2, we went out listening to people with lived experience. So we had identified 12 participants that we worked with across the UK, and we actually did interviews with them initially to get to know them a bit, to understand their health condition or their disability, to explain to them the process that we were going to be going through with them in phase 2 in terms of coming and joining them at their home, and then experiencing the built environment with them, and then for coming back to their home, so spending a day with them. And then also explaining to them that in the phase 3 we would do a third interview where we would actually ask them to do some co-design and show how they would like the built experience to look using, again, accessible tools. So it was this 3-stage people-centered process. Our initial research with the experts that we interviewed identified that for those people with health conditions and disabilities, experiences in the built environment can be highly stressful, that we also need to consider the complete customer journey. So it wasn't just about going to the area of the built environment that we were going to, it was about when they left home. It was almost before they left home that they needed to know where they were going. So it was about that whole journey. When they got to that space, it was then about how they would get back home, and then again, that journey before they were going back out into the built environment. So we really wanted to understand their complete journey and how they were affected as they interpreted the built environment. And another aspect that had really come up through our research was linked through to neurodiversity, and that we all experience the built environment through our senses. There are certain senses that we're sort of much more aware of and more heightened to, but actually it's about understanding how especially people with health conditions can experience the built environment through their senses, and that they might be heightened in different areas and how that is affected. So bearing this in mind, we were working alongside experts in the built environment, predominantly with Bureau Happold, with June Hewitt, who is an expert and is currently about to launch a new neurodiversity guide. So it was all linked to the development of this guide, as well as to which senses we would do and how we would carry out sensory mapping with our participants. We worked with the 5 predominant senses that we're all quite aware of, and we added movement as the 6th sense. So that's sort of spatial awareness and how somebody would navigate through the space. Having thought about the environment being extremely stressful, we developed traffic light cards that we would give to participants for them to communicate their levels of stress. So 1 obviously is a lower stress, 2 middle, and 3 heightened stress. With all of our participants, we would make sure this methodology was appropriate for their disability or health condition. If somebody was visually impaired, we would ask them just to use the numbers 1, 2, 3. So we made sure that it was tailored accordingly to the participant that we were working with. What we found was that with the traffic light cards, it really gave people an opportunity to communicate how they were feeling, sometimes in some quite difficult situations, just quietly by changing the card. And it's again this thing about doing things with your hands, just as with my PhD research with that modeling with the cake and getting people to engage and be creative. In the same way, it was about giving somebody a card that would allow them to show us how they were feeling, and just slowly holding something with their hands. And we were able to then track how people were from leaving their home, which was predominantly a 1, they usually were fairly calm, or a 2, and then as they navigated to the through the built environment to the space that we were going to, it would usually start getting more heightened and end up at a 3. We worked with the participants that every time they changed a card, we would stop and just ask them what it was that had caused their stress. We would make notes in a form that we had developed to then link that to the senses. So not only were we tracking the 1, 2, 3 of the stress, but we were also then tracking when they did change stress, or it went up or down, what it was that had heightened or calmed them within the built environment, so that we could really map how each individual participant was affected by their senses. We were asking them to think about sound, light, smell, texture, spatial awareness, air quality, colours that they were seeing, materials, and really thinking about that with the questions that we would ask them when we stopped and had that conversation with it when the cards changed. This was then graphically represented by participants. So we took photographs of, as we were journeying through the environment of where we were going to, away from their home, within the environment that we were heading to, and then coming back to their home. And then through that, we took photos of where we were at and which senses at that point were being heightened. And we would then graphically map these accordingly by participant as it went from 3 to 2 to 1, etc. And then underneath here, you can see the little icon showing what has affected them in terms of the changes that were being made. This is one example from a participant we were working at, shows the overall map. So by the 12 participants that we worked with, we had these sensory maps where we would then graphically show how their journey had altered through the built environment and which points were the most stressful, so that we could pick out those hotspots that we could then target as to how these could be redesigned as a priority using best practice inclusive design. So all of these maps, then underneath you will see, underneath the senses, you've got little photographs of particular things that the participant had identified that were extremely stressful at that point that it had heightened or calmed. So these maps gave us a really great insight into how somebody navigated the built environment with a disability or a health condition. In this third final interview that we did with our participants, we then presented back those maps to ensure that they had an opportunity to reflect as to whether they thought that was as they experienced their day with us, and if they wanted to make any changes or alterations. And then from that, we asked them at this third stage to start co-designing their ideal built environment space. We sent them in the post a pack, because the third interview was done remotely, and they received in their pack bubble zones, just like I was talking about in my PhD research, just sort of using those zone ideas to pick out key aspects within the built environment that we had identified on our maps that were areas that we needed to tackle as a priority. And then we gave them an A4 sheet of paper, and the little bubble zones for the key areas within that environment, and also as well some little people that they could place. And we asked them to show us how they would design their ideal space as they came in through the door, reception area, navigating through the space, where they would place different aspects, where they would place the people that they were going to interact with. And then we asked them to use a pen to actually come in through the door and show us how they navigated that space ideally, and talk to us from a sensory perspective. And all of these ideas went forward to leading proposals that we put forward to the government as to how this area that we were looking at could be improved from the perspective of those people that we'd work with, understanding their lived experience navigating the built environment. So again, I think what was really key in this project, that it was asking participants to show us their ideas using hands-on approaches to visually communicate thoughts and ideas that could then lead to further, more in-depth conversations. I think that's what's really interesting about all of the processes I'm going to talk today, is that when you do ask people to start doing something with their hands, the conversation slightly goes to a deeper level, and people start relaxing. They're more at ease, they're more engaged with what they're talking about. They feel that they are capable of doing what you're asking them to do, because the tools have been tailored accordingly to allow them to start being designers and to visually illustrate their ideas. And I think this project, particularly one with the sensory mapping, it was that combination of hands-on processes and getting people to play with objects, and obviously, modern technology, what we have with all these different graphic packages and design packages, that makes the co-design process even more interesting, both being of equal importance. But I think the two marrying up of the sort of technology and the hands-on processes is a really interesting area of inquiry. My final case study is actually a live project that I'm working on for DEFRA on developing a sea bass, although fishers say bass, bass FMP, which stands for Fisheries Management Plan. So as you can see, the projects we work on are very diverse across government, but all of them are about starting with those people who are ultimately affected by a future policy that's going to be developed. So the challenge that we've got for this project, and it is very much in the early stages, we're in that phase 1 stage, is how can we co-design a new national framework that allows for regional adaptation for sea bass management to ensure this valuable natural resource can benefit a diverse range of environmental, commercial, recreational, social and political interests, while ensuring stocks remain sustainable, foster empathy and trust with those involved, and create a positive legacy for FMPs. So it's quite a challenge. And the reason it is quite a challenge is because there's a lot of history around FMPs. This is a completely new area for Policy Lab. We are not experts in sea bass, but we are experts in working with people and designing policy for people. So that's why DEFRA have come to us, because they want to try something new, to try and re-engage the stakeholders, especially the fishers, who at the moment are extremely frustrated. So we again have done our phase 1 research, where we've done 14 interviews with various stakeholders across the bass landscape. So that's from a sort of government perspective, thinking about our relationship with the EU, and that's talking to industry, from supermarkets to restaurants, to the fishers themselves, because there is a huge diversity in the type of fisher, whether that be recreational or commercial. We have spoken to scientists as well, because within this, obviously, there's that fine balance between what's commercially wanted we've and then what's sustainable in terms of the marine life. So we interviewed 14 stakeholders, and initially we're getting an insight to this very complicated area. Number one was that fishers really need to be actively engaged. There's a lot of stakeholder fatigue and frustration, and we've already come across that ourselves with the fishers that we've met. Currently, we have one national plan which doesn't work for regional requirements. There's huge variations in terms of where the bass are, and in terms of what happens regionally with other species that they can or can't fish. There's a quota currently attached to bass, because a few years back there were unsustainable levels of sea bass, and so they needed to make the stocks needed to be replenished, and as a result of that they put in quotas, which doesn't allow the fishers very much scope in terms of how much bass they can fish. they're saying that the species are in abundance in some areas now, but the science maybe hasn't quite caught up with what the fishers are saying. So there's a huge sort of regional differentiation in terms of how they fish, where they fish, and what type of fish they have to fish. And it's a real sort of desperate situation for some of the fishers because it's their livelihood. And so what we are developing is a co-design process that's inclusive, so that everybody can have a say. Some fishers are illiterate. They will struggle to understand the very complicated government FMP. And so we're trying it in a different approach, a more visual approach, which will hopefully make it more accessible for everybody to come and show and illustrate what their current frustrations are and what they would like to see. So we are at the stage where we're now mapping out all the different aspects and complexities within our BAS system within the UK, the different types of boats and how that affects what you're allowed to fish, the different type of equipment that you can fish with, and again, how that affects how you fish. Then working with scientists and to understand what this from a sustainability perspective, and then also with the EU as well in terms of what we need to do in terms of working alongside the EU. A lot of the fishers obviously don't want to now that we're out of the EU, but we need to keep that relationship. So there's a fine balance in many, many areas. So it's very complicated. We're beginning to get our heads around the system, but one idea that we've got at the moment, which is still in an idea phase, and I'm really hoping we'll go forward, is that we use serious gaming and we replicate the very complicated BAS system into a game, a collaborative, serious game that will invite stakeholders to come and visually represent the current FMP as it stands by region. So our plan is that as of in a week or so's time, we're actually going out to ports and out to recreational fishers to spend time with them, hopefully going out on the boats and actually fishing, and actually out with IFCAs, who are the police on the seas as well, and to understand what their role is, and the MMO, who look after the marine areas as well, to understand their world and film and record. And also from that learn their language, so that we can really tailor a game that is built around the system and shows that we understand what we're talking about and we understand what their day-to-day lived experience life is like. So just as we did with the previous project, we will be spending a lot of time out there with fishers and really getting into their world. These are examples of games, of serious games that I've just picked out as some inspiration, as showing ideas of how we could do this and why we think this is a good idea. Our idea is that we would use the current FMP to create a game that we would then incorporate the different fishers, the different types of fishing equipment, the different types of boats, etc., regionally, to go out to co-design workshops after we've been to the port. So when we've done our lived experience research in June, July, in September, we're going to do co-design workshops back out at 7 ports and with recreational fishers as well, where we will then ideally, hopefully get them to come in and actually play our game. We won't call it a game, first of all. I think that's a real sensitivity around that, and people are a bit scared about this idea of going into fishers who are quite cross and angry and telling them that we're going to play a game. So we're going to call it a simulation at first and ask them to come and simulate what their experience is visually. The idea being that when we're in these co-design workshops, we will then photograph what the Southwest are saying, the South, the East, the North, the East, and the Northwest, and Wales. And then we will be able to take that away, the idea being that we can then find where the common areas are and where the differences are, and then return to them in co-refine workshops, but all the time played through a game. So the game will evolve as we're playing it. This is a game called the fishing game that we were playing yesterday, actually, which is quite an interesting one, just trying out different methodologies of, if you have different types of boats, how many fish you can catch, and how that then affects the price of your fish as it goes up and down, and how that affects sustainability is whether how much fish is available. So these are just ideas we're looking at the moment for leading our serious game. An idea is that we will develop a policy by asking players to illustrate what the current problems are across the BAS system, and then play out national, regional what is and what if scenarios, and then map their shared goals and regional complexities to try and get people to start working in a different way. Our current experience is that, you know, the relationship between DEFRA and the fishes is really not great, and we've got to try something different. At the moment, it's very much, you know, sit around a room with people with their arms crossed and looking quite angry, and it's somebody talking. So we want to sort of get rid of that and get people collaborating and coming together. It will be a bit of an experiment, but we have to try something new. Before we launch the game, and as we develop the game, we're going to be testing the concept with the University of Plymouth, Fish Intel. These are scientists who are also working on bass, particularly in the southwest. They are tracking them to see where they're migrating. There is much more bass movement going up to the north due to global warming. So they are currently tracking bass, and they want to be able to use their findings in applied situations. So actually it's great timing for both of us. They're going to help us develop the game to make sure that we've got the terminology correct, and then we're using the right language. They've got fishers that they're working with in the southwest who will test it for us, and then they're going to use their science and the information that they're finding out about where their bass are at the moment in our co-design workshops and co-refine workshops. So as I said before, when we do the co-design workshops with Fishers and Play the Game in September, we will then, when we've gone round the UK, come back to them in co-refine workshops to actually show them what all the different regions have said, so that they can really try and understand what other people's frustrations are in the east of England compared to the southwest, for example. And what we're hoping with this process, if it does go ahead, is that we provide a transparent system that can hopefully overcome some current frustrations that the stakeholders have, that they're not listened to. And I would just hope that it's not going to be a perfect FMP. It's such a complicated landscape, and that we need to be transparent, we need to be honest, but we need to show them that we are listening and we are explaining. So if it's not going to go necessarily in the direction they want, that we've at least explained why that is, and that they've had a say and understood why that is possibly happening. So we want to build trust and make sure this is some iterative process, that they're involved with the whole time that we're working on this project, which is till the end of December, and then that they continue to have a way of communicating into DEFRA to keep that relationship and try and build on it. And we're just hoping that we can design and tailor and test the tools with this audience, and that to allow them as the experts to make the rules and try something new, as I was saying, address this stakeholder fatigue. So in summary, just a couple of slides about playful co-design. It's really thinking about your audience and tailoring appropriately to your project to empower your stakeholders. So what a method is appropriate for one project won't necessarily be appropriate for another project. So it's really about that initial stage of investigation, understanding who your stakeholders are, and then designing with them, for them, empowering them to become the experts, and allowing them as non-designers to become designers and visually illustrate their ideas and engage in a design process. They might not even be aware that they're actually designing, but they are giving you their input and their say in an accessible format. And finally, as well, that co-design is not a linear process. And I think this is a challenge sometimes as a co-designer, is when projects come along and you're asked to put forward a proposal, often you don't quite know, and you shouldn't know, what it's going to look like at the end. And people are always quite transfixed on what's the end product or what's the end result. And you have to keep coming back to, well, we don't quite know what that's going to be, because we've got to go through the process to establish what that end product's going to be. And I think that's something that is something that we have to keep working with in the co-design world, is making people comfortable that it's okay to not know quite what it's going to be at the end. And that's a good thing, that we haven't got an end product that we're working towards. We've got an end idea, and how we will get to that idea will evolve with the stakeholders to ensure that it's the right end product or has been designed in the right way. Serious Play provides this shared language. It is a co-learning process to ensure that all users' voices are heard and taken into consideration. play, I really hope that play will become a word that people have a better understanding about, that it won't be taken as something that's a waste of time, which can often be seen as, or that, you know, you're not working. I think in certain situations, actually, it's the most productive way of getting ideas out of people, and in the right format, it's extremely powerful. So I think it's quite interesting, our ideas about play versus work. I'm something that I'm fascinated in. Such projects as co-design is a form of individual and community engagement. It brings people together. It gives people an opportunity to understand other people's perspectives. And sometimes the process itself is actually more of a priority than the overall end product. It's that overall experience that people have in a co-design process that it's so engaging, and a form of community engagement and empowerment, which I think in all the projects I've worked on so far in co-design is the most rewarding part, the relationships that you build with those people you're working with. And I will finish there and see if we've got any questions. Thank you very much. I'll just stop sharing.
Thank you very much, Kate. That was fascinating. And we have a lot of questions in the chat, which I'll go through. But before I do that, I'd just like to say thank you. It was a really clear explanation of what you're doing. And as I said, I think it's fascinating. I have a question, which is, how do you resolve conflicts? You said there was this, you know, particularly younger people and older people in your initial PhD project wanting to put certain preferences in certain directions. I mean, you came up with an answer, but how did that resolve the conflict?
So in that situation, it was the teenagers were sort of seen as threatening. They were hanging out in a certain area of the park, and the older members of the community felt that when they walked past them, that they were scared and they felt intimidated by them. When we spoke to the teenagers, they felt that actually they were not really treated with respect and that they were seen as a nuisance. So when we put them, I did a workshop with the groups and asked them to start modeling. There was a situation where they were actually building and showing where they were wanting to put their skate park, the teenagers, and then were saying, oh, that the older members of the community don't understand us, and that we feel that we're, you know, seen as a nuisance, and actually we're just teenagers, we want to have fun. We're not doing anything wrong, we're just with our mates, and sometimes we can get carried away. Then from the other perspective, I had the group of older members of the community saying, oh, when I walk my dog later at night, I feel really intimidated, the lighting's poor. So when that information came through, and then we were able to share with the two groups what they were each saying, there was that real opportunity to start understanding with one another, and then they started modeling together. And this idea of the cake was quite extraordinary, that people, rather than being slightly frustrated with one another, it gave them this common ground, if you like, of laughing about modeling with a chocolate finger or cutting up a bit of cake, and suddenly they were working together and actually engaging with one another in a way that made them realize that maybe the teenagers weren't as scary as they thought, and actually the older members of the community were actually fine, and they weren't going to be sort of a nuisance or what have you. So it gave them an opportunity to get to know one another and then work together on an idea. And then actually it was really amazing that the BMX and the skate park was in between the gym, which the adults had predominantly asked.
Okay, so I'll move on to the questions in the chat. And in fact, Sarah West has asked several questions. So Sarah, why don't you unmute yourself and ask something directly to Kate, rather than me trying to figure out which one of these you should go for.
Yeah, thank you. No, that's great, Kate. I had so many questions for you because I thought it was absolutely fascinating. Thank you so much. I think actually my first question is related to what Paul was just saying, which is about I was thinking about the use of cake to kind of level the power dynamics, because presumably nobody had designed using cake in the group before, apart from you as the facilitator. So I wondered if you felt that the use of cake helped kind of flatten out the power dynamics between the different age groups or different genders or different ethnicities.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, it was something that everybody could relate to, and it started an instant conversation. So there wasn't that awkwardness because everybody just talked about chocolate fingers. I mean,
Yeah.
I think that just on that side of sort of engaging people, the hardest group I found to engage was older men, actually. And I had an interesting case where there was, especially on the Somerset project, where there were farmers, and I think they thought I was completely mad, and they were not very interested in engaging. But then at the end of the project, they were so interested in what we were doing, they came in the back of the room when we were in the co-design workshops, quietly sat down. So I just gave them their form to fill in to say, you know, they weren't allergic to this, that, and the other. And then actually, again, they led the modeling and the conversation and totally engaged with the process. So it definitely was a sort of a level playing field for people to communicate on.
Yeah,
in that situation.
Thank you. And then the other one was about the designs from the 12 participants. So the project that you're not allowed to name.
Oh yes.
How did you merge those designs from those 12 participants? Was there much commonality in their designs given their very differing health conditions, or?
Well, I didn't merge those ones. That was slightly different scenario, actually. That was more about providing a pack that everybody could use that was the same, but then seeing where they were placing their items. So for example, in the current built environment that we were talking about, there was no reception area and no one to greet you when you came in the door. So it was really seeing where the patterns were, and actually out of all of our participants, they were putting that they wanted somebody to greet them and someone to smile, and they were really talking about that human aspect of people just being there to say hello and can I help you. So that was with those ones, it was more seeing about where out of those participants, who was placing things where they were, rather than trying to merge them. And then from those ideas, we went back to the government department and told them that actually, you know, the sensory map had identified that the reception area was so important, and then this is what people were wanting.
Okay, thank you. And then I think the last one, Lucianne's probably got a very similar comment to me, but it was a bit more about the kind of the game and simulation, and I was particularly interested in the low literacy levels that you mentioned of some of the fishers, and therefore how you could design a game that was simple enough to understand if there's low levels of literacy, but complex enough to develop realistic policy scenarios. And I think Lucianne has got a question about, yeah, how this links in with perhaps some sophisticated board games that you might play.
Yeah, I mean,
Lucianne, if you want to chip in.
Yeah, do chip in, Lucy, if you want to. This is a project we are very much just starting. So I haven't officially designed a game like this before, so it's quite an exciting opportunity. And it's that I think is something we've got to really work through. It's so complicated. I mean, it's overwhelmingly complicated, the landscape of the bass, and then how we can actually get that to pick out those key aspects that we really need to work with the fishers, but then also make sure it's applicable nationally and regionally. So that, yes, I think that's a really interesting question, and something that is a challenge that we've got to work with going forward. We're working with a game designer called Matteo. I should know his surname, I can't remember, but he's going to be helping us with the development of this game, and he has worked on similar sort of collaborative policy type games as well. So this is a new area for us, really.
Thanks, Sarah. Yeah, my question was very similar, actually. I was just going to ask about whether you felt that the direction for the board game was more around it being kind of symbolic of the activities that fishers engaged in, or whether it was more strategic in terms of kind of, you know, finding routes for action and kind of plans for the future, and whether you thought those two things might produce different effects ultimately.
That's a very good question. I think the game will have to evolve, and I was saying this to Matteo when I was speaking with him yesterday, is that we need to, first of all, develop a game on the current FMP system, and then ask fishers when we're out with them in the different regions to show us what type of boat they're on, what type of kit they're using, and then how the current FMP affects them and their frustrations around it. Then to take that away and then to almost evolve the game to then a scenario where we're putting forward proposals as to how the FMP could work nationally, with hopefully showing, hopefully we're going to identify some common areas that there must be out there in terms of a national framework, but then how we can do a regional adaptation for these fishers that need to work in different situations and have different frustrations. And again, in those co-refine, ask them to play the game again, and maybe we'll have challenge cards and scenarios that will play out using cards and turning a card saying, right, okay, well, what if this happens? How would that affect you? And then all of this linking into the FMP, which ultimately DEFRA will create, but in December, we will hopefully be able to hand over to them all of those stakeholder inputs.
Okay, well, thank you. I think in view of the time, although we've still got some more questions, and I see, Sam, you've got your hand up. I think given that we've come to the end of the time, I think we should draw this to a close. I think there's indication from all the questions, Kate, that this has been fascinating for all of us, and we probably would like to learn more. I hope you might be willing to answer the odd email if people want to ask you further questions. And as I said at the beginning, which applies to everyone, that Tapas is a network and everyone is invited to join. So if you would like to participate more in Tapas, please just contact us through Kat Roberts, who can't be here today, and we can sort of take that forward. Just to remind everyone that there's a next week, and I'm trying to look up who's talking next week and I can't find it. Anyway, I can't find it for next week, although I will tell you that next Thursday is Clean Air Day, June the 16th. And so there will be activities taking place along with our seminar next Thursday. So with that, I'd just like to thank you all for attending, and special thanks to you, Kate, for a fascinating presentation, and good luck with the sea bass. I hope we can figure out a way to sustainably fish these wonderful creatures and enjoy them, and for them to thrive. So thanks very much, everyone, and we'll see you next week. Okay, bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Bye.